this is going to break down a lot of stuff. And I'm going to start with the story of the RMS Titanic and then take it from there, because there's a much bigger picture. But I like the story of the Titanic, so that's why I'm starting. I could start and just start with J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller, but I'm going to start with the Titanic just because, again, I like the Titanic story. So, that sinking of the Titanic on April 4th, 1912, history shows that it's one of the most tragic maritime disasters in history. Official records state that the luxury liner hit an iceberg and sank in the freezing North Atlantic, taking the lives of 1,500, give or take, passengers and crew members. The world mourned because it was a tragedy, and it was classified as an unfortunate accident caused by human error and environmental conditions. However, there is a lot of evidence that suggests the Titanic sinking was not an accident. There's a lot of evidence, guys. There's more evidence from what I have found that supports this than it supports the accident. It supports that it was carefully planned for financial and political narrative. This is very interesting, guys, because one of the most powerful figures of that time was J.P. Morgan. He was a banking mogul and the force behind the White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic. He had a first-class ticket on board that ship, yet last minute he canceled his trip. That kind of raises suspicion amongst my eyes. But what's even more compelling is that his three most wealthiest competitors, three of the most influential men who opposed J.P. Morgan's idea of the Federal Reserve, was on board, and none of them survived. I'm going to make the case that this disaster was orchestrated to eliminate these powerful rivals, and it paved the way for the creation of the Federal Reserve that is essentially enslaved our country financially over the years. To fully understand what I'm talking about, you have to understand the Titanic's identical sister ship, the Olympica. A year before the Titanic's fatal voyage, the Olympic was involved in a series of collisions, and it hit a British Royal Navy cruiser ship. It was also torpedoed by a Nazi submarine. But the damage, it wasn't so severe that it couldn't float, but it was declared uninsurable due to the extent of the structural weakening. So, as you can see how this kind of lines up, there was no way for them to recover their losses. So, this also looks like a case of insurance fraud, because the White Star Line, it looks like they switched the identities of the two ships, secretly renaming the Olympic as the Titanic. The plan was simple, yet sinister. Simply send the already compromised ship on its maiden voyage, orchestrate an accident that would result in its sinking, collect the massive insurance payout, and eliminate the rivals that were standing in the way of pushing forward the Federal Reserve. Because the three men that were on there were on the board and were opposing J.P. Morgan's idea for the Federal Reserve, a private entity that would handle the finances and the money and the printing of money for our nation. Now, how convenient is that, guys? Think about that. If you were a private banker and you could somehow manipulate your way into having an entire nation do its banking through your private company, giving you the authority to print your own money, to what end would you go to make that happen? To what end would you go to make that happen? Think about that. Guys, I'm just getting started. This is a long one. And I'm going to make the case for how this has paved the way for the beast system that we see right now. Because wait until you hear the timeline of events that I have studied and how everything is connected to the World Economic Forum that is ruling right now. It's going to be very interesting. It even goes into detail because understand that the top financier of Nikola Tesla's projects was J.P. Morgan. So speculate on that for just 1 second, because this is very dark, and when you understand everything in its chronological order and the history, none of this is speculation. This is, I'm shooting facts by. I understand that it is speculation that they maybe switched the names on the ship. At that time, J.P. Morgan was consolidating control over the U.S. financial system and leading efforts to establish the Federal Reserve. And 3 people that were opposing this were on that boat. The Federal Reserve, a central banking system that would grant the private banker in control over the country's money supply. Again, as I mentioned, some of the wealthiest men in America stood in his way. Benjamin Guggenheim, who was a powerful mining magnate who had deep financial influence in the U.S. industrial sector. Isidor Straus, owner of Macy's department store, was one of the most respected businessmen of the time and held very strong political connections. And John Jacob Astor, one of the wealthiest men in the world at that time, had the power and influence to challenge Morgan's vision for the Federal Reserve. All 3 of these men opposed the creation of a central banking system, knowing what would happen, fearing that it would put too much power in the hands of the elite banker, particularly J.P. Morgan and his associates, Rockefeller. So their deaths on the Titanic conveniently eliminated the key opposition for Morgan's plan. Just a year after that tragedy, in 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, marking the greatest shift in financial power in all of American history. Convenient, huh? So J.P. Morgan's last-minute cancellation of his trip on the Titanic was a very suspicious element for me. Why would the most powerful financier of time suddenly change his plans and avoid what would become one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history? Did he know something that others didn't? Because it was his, he was the chief financier of the White Star Line. Even more suspicious is how the survivors of the Titanic were treated when they returned. When the passengers finally got back to England, White Star Line locked them inside of a warehouse for 24 hours, allegedly instructing them never to speak about what they had witnessed. If this was truly an accident, why was there such a strong effort in suppressing the survivors' testimonies? So in 1985, researchers discovered the wreckage of Titanic, where the ship had been resting at the bottom of the Atlantic for decades. The examination of its hull revealed something really shocking. The metal plating of the hull, it was really thick steel and iron. It was not bent inward like if it hit an iceberg. It was bent outward. This, in just basic physics, underlines there was an explosion from inside of the ship rather than a simple iceberg that penetrated the hull. The idea that an explosion contributed to the sinking aligns with the survivors' reports that stated that a fire had been burning inside the ship's coal bunker even before the Titanic set sail. So if this is true, it means the ship was already structurally compromised before it even hit the iceberg, especially if the ship was swapped with that other boat that had already had incidents making it uninsurable, making it highly vulnerable to sinking. So that internal fire could have been used to weaken the ship deliberately, alongst with many other things. So the aftermath, when Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor were eliminated, Morgan, J.P. Morgan, and all his buddies faced no further opposition to their plan to establish the Federal Reserve. In December 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, creating that private central banking that gave them exclusive power over everything. J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Rothschild. The Federal Reserve since has become the most powerful financing institution in the world, controlling all money, interest rates, economic policy, and there isn't... What in the world is that? Let me check the door. Jeez. The post office just threw a package at the front door. Wow. Like it bounced off the glass. Anyways, so looking back, that Titanic disaster appears to have played a crucial role in shaping the global financial landscape. This tragedy, from everything that I've found, it's not an accident. It was a covert operation designed to remove obstacles, secure financial control, and to manipulate the course of history. What we know for sure is J.P. Morgan controlled White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic. Everything else, I really broke it down for you. But from then, it became about global control, financial enslavement, energy suppression, a deliberate timing of strategic moves made by the most powerful people in the world. And this timeline started even before Titanic, when J.P. Morgan suppressed Nikola Tesla's free energy technology in 1904. It went on to the Titanic in 1912 and the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. This was the establishment that paved the way for them to create the United Nations, the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR. If you guys have ever looked into the CFR, it is super sketchy, but they are probably one of the most powerful organizations in the world. And then he formed the WEF, the World Economic Forum. I don't think these are unrelated coincidences. This was a strategic consolidation of power where they control the energy and enslave all the nations under a global financial system. So at the dawn of the 20th century, Nikola Tesla stood on the edge of revolutionizing human civilization. He had visions beyond what most people could comprehend. One of his visions was the wireless energy transmission through the Wardenclyffe Tower project. And this would literally free humanity from energy monopoly. It would really give people just massive amounts of freedom. Tesla had discovered a way to harness the Earth's magnetic field, providing free electricity without the need of power plants, fuel, oil, government-controlled grids, the whole ball of wax. J.P. Morgan, already one of the most powerful people in the world, had initially backed Tesla with $150,000 funding. But Tesla made the fatal mistake by openly admitting that his invention would allow people to access energy freely. As soon as he told J.P. Morgan that, he immediately withdrew all of his funding. He asked Nikola Tesla, and this is a quote, "If anyone can draw on the power, where do we put the meter?" J.P. Morgan understood that free energy would eliminate his ability to profit from electricity, fuel, centralized power, and even worse, it would weaken his financial control over all the nations. As governments and corporations relied on energy as a tool of economic enslavement. Without Morgan's backing, Tesla's work was buried. Matter of fact, J.P. Morgan told everybody he knew to stay away from Tesla. He blacklisted him everywhere. He was untouchable. No one would touch Tesla because of J.P. Morgan slandering his name. The Wardenclyffe Tower was eventually dismantled in 1917, and the world was kept in the dark about the free energy technology that he had proven. J.P. Morgan's alliance with Rockefeller, the oil baron who dominated global energy, ensured that all future innovations of energy would be controlled, suppressed, and monetized. They made certain that humanity would remain dependent on coal, oil, and electricity grids, all owned by their elites in their circle. You know, in 1945, the United Nations created its advanced global governance. The banking and corporate elite structure that sought to seek the power to control the world under the guise of promoting world peace and cooperation. However, in reality, the UN was designed as a global governing body that would gradually erode nations' sovereignty and centralize powers into the hands of the WEF global elites. All the families involved in that were the same families structured in the Federal Reserve. They are the ones that created the UN. Their goal was to create a system where nations could be manipulated through international laws, economic policy, and military interventions. Understand that the CFR was created in 1921, and the WEF. These folks are the juggernauts. They dictate the most power. This is at the core of J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and all those other elites. The CFR essentially became the deep state, what they call it now, the cabal, controlling foreign policy, wars, global trade agreements. Almost every U.S. president, CIA director, media executives have all been controlled by the CFR, ensuring that only their policies promoted were approved. The WEF, founded by Klaus, became the public face of global control, promoting and controlling everything in the financial system, using climate change agendas and social engineering initiatives to dictate policy. And even today, we see the face of the WEF being the one that is pushing forward the digital biometric ID, global energy control, and the transhumanist agenda. All of these organizations stem from J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller's legacy of financial and energy control that still continues to this era. Think about how things would be if the Titanic didn't sink. Throughout history, tons of great innovations have been celebrated while others have been buried, stolen, and deliberately suppressed because they threaten the control of the world's elites. Nikola Tesla is a fine example. Arguably one of the most greatest scientific minds to ever live. He was a visionary who discovered a lot of stuff, even the key to free energy. An unlimited source of electricity. And his work would have completely eliminated energy dependence. It's really a shame to see what has happened, because the battle for energy control and financial dominance is not just an issue of the past. It continues to shape our world today. More importantly, it ties into the biblical principles of oppression, greed, and the war between truth and deception. Ecclesiastes 1:9 reminds us, what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. The same corrupt forces that oppose Tesla's free energy movement continue to rule right now through financial oppression, energy monopolization, and the suppression of all breakthrough technology. See, Tesla, he believed that this free energy was a gift from God, meant to be freely available to everyone, much like the sun, the wind, the air. His ideas aligned with God's design for creation, where natural resources are abundant and meant to sustain life without corruption and greed. His principle, it reflected Matthew 10:8, where Jesus commands his disciples, freely you have received, and freely you give. Tesla's concept of free energy was in direct opposition of the greed-driven business moguls through J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, who wanted every human being to be enslaved by their globalist elites. What's just really interesting is nothing has changed. If Tesla's technology had been fully developed and implemented, the world today would be completely different. There would be no dependence on oil, fossil fuels, no massive electricity bills, no centralized energy controlled by governments and corporations. Guys, during the summertime, this big house, my electricity bill is almost $900 a month. People in the poorest regions of the world would have access to free, clean power. The wars fought over oil, energy resources, and land control would cease to exist. This level of freedom, however, was a direct threat to all the globalists. When J.P. Morgan first invested into Tesla, he saw an opportunity to control yet another sector of human life, electricity. However, Tesla was not interested in creating a privatized energy market. He wanted to give the power away for free. And this was the fatal mistake that he made, telling J.P. Morgan, who immediately cut ties. Then you have Rockefeller and his oil empire. He was bilaterally working with J.P. Morgan. Whereas Tesla was working for free energy, John D. Rockefeller had monopolized the oil industry through Standard Oil, controlling nearly all fuel energy production in the United States. Oil was the backbone for everything. Transportation, machinery, heating, even, the plastics and everything have oil in them because that's how they're made. If Tesla's wireless energy transmission had succeeded, it would have completely destroyed the need for oil, causing Rockefeller's empire to collapse overnight. Like Morgan, Rockefeller wasn't going to allow this to happen. Together, these two greedy, power-hungry folks eliminated Tesla. His work was ridiculed, and his research was stolen and hidden from public view. In a world ruled by greed, Tesla was an outlier. He believed that energy belonged to mankind, not any corporations. Though the elite, however, saw things differently, their entire empire was built on forcing people to pay for what they should have for free. Whether it was oil, electricity, water, or food, their goal was to create an artificial monopoly over the entire world to maintain control. That mindset aligns with the spirit of Babylon in Revelations 18, which describes a corrupt system that enslaves the nations through trade, deception, and financial oppression. The merchants of the earth, representing the wealthy elite, are described as one who has profited from human suffering and resource control. Quote, "For your merchants were the great men of the earth, and by your sorcery of all the nations they were deceived. Revelations 18:23. You know, because of all that, Tesla, he was ruined and he aged. And eventually, every institution that saw him abandoned him. He died alone, impoverished, broke in a New York hotel room in 1943. And immediately at his death, his research was confiscated by the U.S. government. I know for a fact that his work didn't disappear. It was simply just taken to the black sites, repurposed for military classified projects. Because that same research is what gave birth to the HARP project, which manipulates weather, electromagnetic fields, all based off of Tesla's discoveries. Tesla's discoveries fueled the zero-point energy, which is running everything that's underground. It powers all the advanced weaponry that they use. These things that we're seeing that stays up in the skies for 10 to 12 hours at a time, running on zero-point energy. All built off the very knowledge that Morgan and Rockefeller suppressed from the public. You know, from suppressing Tesla's free energy technology in 1904 to eliminating all the opponents to the Federal Reserve in 1912 on the Titanic, to creating the Federal Reserve in 1913 and establishing a global governance with the UN, CFR, and the WEF, the elite have systematically built a system of total control. Through financial enslavement, energy monopolization, corporate dominance, they have engineered a global dependence on their systems. The ultimate goal is the one world government where that small group of elites dictate everything. The Bible warns us in Revelations 13, 16, 17, a time is coming where no one will be able to buy or sell unless they comply with the global system. The events of the past century have paved the way for this prophetic reality. As the world's powers consolidate under the financial elites who control every aspect of society, really the biggest question is, are folks going to wake up before it's too late? It's been happening right before their very eyes for the last century. All anyone had to do was look. It's all there.